So our next speaker is Young-Schultz, who's a Master's of Science student at the University of Toronto. He's interested in computer architecture and hardware acceleration and is involved in CPU, GPU, and FPGA acceleration of a light propagation simulator used for photodynamic therapy treatment planning.
All right, thank you for the introduction for both of them. So the purpose of this talk today, really three main things. The first is just to show kind of a cool FPGA application in the real world, that being a light propagation simulator. I'm going to show some of the adventures I had with OpenCL performance debugging, which was fun. I'm also going to try and motivate, in general, the usage of high-level design as best as I can. So the agenda is I'm going to start with one particular medical application of light that we find interesting. There's many, but I'm going to start with the one that we focus on. Then I'm going to talk about specifically how you simulate the propagation of light, agnostic to any specific architecture. Then I'm going to talk about specifically our FPGA-Accelerated light propagation simulator. It's still a mouthful every time I say it. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the design productivity of OpenCL. So to begin, I'm going to talk about photodynamic therapy, which is the medical application of this light propagation simulator. The idea of photodynamic therapy at a super high level is to kill cancer cells, kill any cell that divides rapidly, so cancer cells, bacterial infections. So we have this guy here, or girl, he's got a tumor in her head. So what we start with is we inject, or we give them a photosensitizer. So this photosensitizer goes through the bloodstream, and it prefers to accumulate in rapidly dividing cells, like bacterial infections, like cancer cells. We then give them, or inject them, the doctor injects them with light sources. As you can see, I skipped too quickly. So light sources are injected. The light is emitted from those light sources. And the light on its own and the photosensitizer on its own are safe for the patient, but when they're combined, it activates the photosensitizer. The activation of this photosensitizer causes nearby reactive oxygen radicals, which in turn cause cell damage, and given sufficient cell damage, cause tissue damage. So the goal of photodynamic therapy at a super high level is to kill all of the tumor and preserve healthy tissue. So in the little toy example we have here, this is good, we killed some tumor, right? This is bad, we killed healthy brain. And this is also bad, we didn't kill all of the tumor. And tumors suck, and they come back. So there's various ways that we can control the outcome of this treatment plan. One way is to control where the light goes, right? So how can we control that? Well, we control how many light sources we use. We control the type of light sources we use. We can control where we put those light sources. And lastly, we control the power of those light sources. Together, solving this problem of all of these problems is not a closed form solution. Is, if you want to call it NP hard. And so what we do is we iterate to optimize. I know everyone in this room is used to that. So parallel work to mine has shown that automation of this treatment planning process can significantly improve the outcome. We can kill more of the tumor and save more of that healthy tissue. The problem is that these plans take significant time to create. So they take on the order of days and weeks to create. And people with tumors don't always have days or weeks. So another thing that we've seen is that in this process of creating this treatment plan, we find that roughly 90% of the time is just simulating, given where we put those light sources, what light sources we used. Most of the time is spent just figuring out where the light will go because of that. And so accelerating light simulation can improve both the quality of that treatment plan by running more simulations in an allocated period of time, but it can also just reduce the time it takes to create that plan. Both are relevant. So now I'm going to talk specifically about my work and how you simulate that light propagation. So to simulate light, we need to do three things. We need to model the geometry, we need to model the underlying tissues of the body. We need to model those light sources that the doctors implant into people. And lastly, we need to model how that light coming out of those sources behaves in the body. So to start with, we'll start with the geometry. So the medical team takes MRI images, CT images. Those are segmented either by hand or by some fancy machine learning programs. And then we, using those segmented images, we create a mesh of tetrahedrons. To model the physical light sources, we just model them how they are. So we can use different types of light sources, like isotropic points, like cylinders that diffuse out the side, kind of like flashlights that can point the light in some specific direction. And we have to model all those in software and or hardware. And lastly, the actual light physics. So we use a Monte Carlo method. We randomly propagate packets of photons. So when photons are absorbed, they're absorbed once and once only. This is not very computationally efficient. So what we do is we group photons into packets, and we decrease the energy of that packet as it gets absorbed more and more. Simulating more packets means that we have a more accurate simulation, but this is computationally expensive. But on the good side, this is highly parallel. We can go across different devices, we can go across multiple threads. And to do this, we use a well-known, not in this room, but well-known to biophysicists, algorithm called the hop-drop spin method. So I'm briefly going to discuss that method now. We start with a launch of the photon, or the packet in this case. We give it an initial position and direction. Then we assign it a random distance to move along its current direction. So once it moves along that direction vector, we then drop some of the energy into the tetrahedron it currently resides in. And this models the absorption of light through the body in these different tetrahedrons. Once the drop has occurred, even homogeneous materials scatter light. And so we represent that by randomly sampling an angle and rotating a direction vector of the packet. Once the spin is done, we go back to the hop stage and we just keep going until either the packet exits the mesh or until it runs out of energy. The two edge cases that we have to account for are when the hop of the packet crosses a material boundary. So when it crosses a material boundary, we have to account for two things. We have to account for either reflection off of that boundary, and we also have to account for reflection through that boundary, and we account for all those things. So, how do we accelerate them? How do we make them fast? So some of our prior work include accelerating them on CPUs using multi-threading and vector instructions. We also implemented a GPU version. We got the 13x speed up of the CPU. We also ventured into implementing these on an FPGA using RTL. This is still a work in progress, and it influenced my work of trying to find a quicker way to develop this for an FPGA. Why an FPGA? So we have significant data parallelism. Like I said, these packets can be shown off. They can go to different devices, they can go to different threads, and we have pipeline parallelism to make these deep pipelines to push packets through. We have lots of random number generation. So we have to generate random numbers with different distributions, different precisions, and the FPGA is typically good at this. We can create blocks of hardware to implement custom math, like spinning some direction vector by a matrix. And lastly, we have a very, due to the simulation itself, we have a very irregular memory access pattern. So It's completely random and hoping we can make some on-chip caching structure that can exploit this, that doesn't fit the CPU or GPU cache all that well. Why OpenCL? This is a big question. Why OpenCL? So we tried BlueStack System Verilog. If you don't know, it's a kind of a wrapper around System Verilog. It's still RTL. There's still a knowledge of clock, but it's slightly higher level. So OpenCL has all these benefits of HLS. You can, there's no explicit clock. You have more software-like development flow. But there's more, like automatic system integration, like standardized methods for transferring data to and from the FPGA. Some people call me lazy for this. Some people call me smart. I don't know. It's up to you. Let me know. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the actual simulator that we implemented. So all the pre-processing and post-processing and reading input files, all that fun stuff, is done on a CPU. Because we already had a CPU simulator, this was done for us. I didn't have to rewrite any of this code. It's fantastic. The only part that we implemented on the FPGA itself was the actual propagation of light through the tissue. So I'm going to talk about that in more detail now. How do we make it? What do we do? We took the software code for a CPU and we ported it to a GPU and it worked pretty well. Why don't we try that? So we don't go too much into detail of this fancy pseudocode, just see that it's two loops, nested loops, okay? So when we copied this over to the FPGA for OpenCL, we got absolutely terrible performance. It could not have been slower. And so what do you do now? Do you give up? Do you say the FPGA is the right device? Is OpenCL not the right paradigm? Why was this slow? So in the software code, we found that there's this dependency in this inner loop. And this dependency in the inner loop made it so that we had to finish the entire inner loop, all the iterations, before doing anything else. This caused a stall in the outer loop pipeline, and stalling that outer loop pipeline had to happen for the latency of the inner loop. And that inner loop was 596 cycles. And this is the fancy word, if you don't know, for initiation or II. So what now? What do we do now? So what we do now, at least for me, was to start developing OpenCL like a hardware design. So the really high-level plan was we were going to create a course pipeline. What we're going to do, we're going to literally copy and paste chunks of sequential C code, C++ code, into kernels, into OpenCL kernels. And then what we do is we connect these kernels following the control flow graph of the algorithm to make this course-grained pipeline. So what does that look like in this picture? We start with a launch. We go into draw step, this draw step stage is where we're picking that distance that we're going to move. Then we enter this terrible inner loop. We're going to do a hop. So we could cross interface and we could have to deal with reflection and refraction. And during this, we might exit the mesh. We might exit out of the entire mesh itself. If not, we go back to the hop stage, and eventually this inner loop exits, and we go to this place where we drop some of that energy and we spin the photon packet. Now, we could run out of energy in that packet and it could exit, or we go back to the original stage, and that is the course pipeline that we implemented. All of these arrows are FIFO channels between kernels, and each of these circles are kernels, OpenCL kernels themselves. And we have much better performance. Doubled our Fmax, our I went way down. So now the fun starts. We get to start looking at why we have this II of 2. So if you remember in that drop stage, we had, we would read some value from a tetrahedron, add to it, write it back. Well, there's no way the compiler knows whether that read is going to be to the same, the consecutive operations might be to the same tetrahedron value itself, right? So we have to make sure that no read accumulator writes overlap. And so this is a result that results in that II of 2. So what can we do to get around it? What can we do to get around it in OpenCL? I don't want to write RTL. So the first naive solution that we had was, okay, let's just duplicate the memory, and we shuffle writes between the two memories. Then I can tell the compiler, I know you think there might be a memory contention, or there might be a dependency issue, but because I'm shuffling between, I know there's no issue. So this resulted in an I of 1, good, but really low Fmax. So what was the reason for that low Fmax? What was happening is that entire read accumulate write operation is happening in one cycle. So again, what can I do to fix this? I don't want to write RTL, I want to write OpenCL. So what I do is, using an OpenCL method, I'm able to explicitly register those the read accumulate write operation. So I can break that long latency path, and then I just perform the same optimization I had before. I have 4 instances of the memory, I shuffle in between the 4, and I tell the compiler 4 consecutive iterations of the loop are fine. You can overlap. So the results. We benchmarked our FPGA implementation against the absolute fastest CPU and GPU implementations that exist. For FPGA, we used a Jurassic D10 board with an Intel Stratix 10. We used a Core i7 processor. We utilized all 6 cores and the vector instructions, and then we used an NVIDIA Titan GPU. All this is to say that we used devices that are on roughly the same processor. We duplicated our pipeline, so we had 2 instances of this pipeline running in parallel. And this resulted in a 4x speed up over the CPU, but we were still 3x short of that GPU. I'm going to discuss a little later how we can bump that up a little bit. In terms of performance per watt, we're 11x better than the CPU, and we're 5x better than GPU. Big wins. All right, the big question, was OpenCL worth it? In short, the answer is yes. In my opinion, all these are my opinions. We were able to develop an FPGA design that matched the hypothetical performance of our RTL FPGA design in significantly less time with significantly less code. So if you look at this right column here, this is where it kind of looks a little, we were able to develop a prototype in a similar time to a GPU, but the time to actually increase performance was significantly more. And this is really a direct, sadly, this is a direct consequence of just slow compile times. At the end of the day, I have to wait for the compile to see the performance of the full system. Again, this is my opinion. I know there's at least one person in this room who disagrees with me. So please feel free to ask me after. I'd love to hear debate about this. My colleagues at university know I love this debate. So, even when you're writing OpenCL, you really need a knowledge of the underlying architecture. You might not need to be an expert in the architecture, but you need to know you're targeting FPGA. And because of that, I really think that OpenCL and high-level design as it is now does not enable software developers. I'm not saying it shouldn't, I'm not saying it couldn't, but as of right now, it does not enable software developers. Instead, in good cases, it improves productivity of hardware developers. Like for me example, I've written RTL, I've written OpenCL now, and it really improved my productivity. As you saw in the earlier slide, we described a similar hardware, but in significantly less code. Significantly less than literally measurable files and lines of code. And lastly, and maybe most contentiously, in my experience, I've often been able to match RTL performance, but at the expense of error. So that's a trade-off that you might be willing to make in some cases you won't. So in conclusion, some future work. Currently we have 2 instances of this pipeline using about 20% of the FPGA resources. We want to duplicate that, quadruple that 4 more times, and have 8 instances. And this gives us, assuming linear performance scaling, which is scary for everyone. Assuming linear performance scaling, we think that we can reach around at least 8 to 16x the CPU, and we're able to bypass the performance of that GPU while being significantly less, or being significantly more memory efficient. And lastly, we're currently bounded by on-chip memory, so we're looking at methods for creating on-chip caches in the FPGA VRAMs so that we can move stuff to off-chip memory and have bigger designs. That's all for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks for the nice talk. You mentioned a couple of times irregular memory accesses and the theme going through your talk, but I didn't get a very strong understanding of exactly the nature of those accesses and when you actually discover what you're accessing, when you can bound the limits and what you're accessing and where. Do you comment a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, when I say purely random, I mean truly purely random. I mean, you launch this photon and it randomly propagates through some mesh of tetrahedrons. And those tetrahedrons are stored in memory. Currently, they're stored in on-chip memory. And so from simulation to simulation, we have no clear model of how those will, how we'll access the memory. But we do know that we will access a small number of the tetrahedrons often.
Okay, so just to clarify then, the source of the randomness is the randomness in the directionality.
It's both a source of, they can put those light sources anywhere. We have no idea where to put them. So that's one source of randomness. The other source of randomness is we have no idea, based on the material properties of the tissues, it could scatter a packet a lot, it could scatter a little bit. Depending on where you hit, when you hit an interface, it can reflect it back, it could refract it in some random direction. We have really no idea.
But you do have a model of the distribution of those scatters, right?
Yeah, so there are prefetching techniques that we can do when, yeah, exactly. There's prefetching techniques that we can do where we're in one tetrahedron, we can kind of make a good guess, and that is definitely a source of future proof.
Okay, thanks.
So I love the talk, and I agree with everything except one point.
I love it.
About software programmers. I think we need to differentiate between Python programmers and HPC programmers.
Were you at the talk yesterday?
Yeah.
I was the one that asked the question about that differentiation. Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I think with HOS and OpenCL, I think it's wonderful for people who have appreciation for concurrency, for timing, for placement. When computing spatial, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. So I wasn't here yesterday.
Sorry?
I wasn't here yesterday, but I think, great, thank you.
Oh, sure. I guess if I could just really quickly add to that, I think what I was trying to get across yesterday, my question, and what I was trying to get across here is like, so they talked about, Python is accelerated by C in the background, right? So presumably we need some high-level design technique that allows people who know the hardware to develop those, shells or something that's very fast, and then wrapping that in Python, kind of like, any type of overlay or framework.
I think that's two different techniques.
It's exactly the same.
HPC, you have people who can do the kernel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about creating a stack, yeah.
Hey. So it sounds like you have a bit of a love-hate relationship with OpenCL. So based on your experiences now, how much of the hate part do you attribute to the concrete implementation of the tools that you use, and how much of it is the fundamental paradigm of how these OpenCL tools work with Pragma-based stuff?
Yeah, so I think most of it is just the implementation. I think it's getting better. So I think it's trending in a good direction. But I like the general paradigm. I really like the idea of not opening a system integrator. I don't ever want to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, the alternative is not necessarily Excel, right? If there's any other way you can imagine programming applications. I mean, of course.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be OpenCL. Just something that abstracts away a lot of the stuff that I shouldn't have to deal with, like global memory accesses and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
One other question.
Yeah.
For the energy efficiency, how did you measure that in FPGA and GPU? Because neither of those run in CDP in practice. So
Yeah, so I use vectorless analysis. This is a good question. I use vectorless analysis on the FPGA. I wish I could have used vectored analysis. And I think with the use of, if I had a simulator, which I know is becoming more supported, I would have had a vectored analysis, but I just had to use a vectorless analysis. And I used the TDP of CPU and GPU.
That's definitely not accurate in practice. So
Yeah, I used a fraction of the TDP. I talk about it in much more detail in the paper if it's worth knowing.
Quick one, but could you comment? If I remember, you mentioned you also optimize things on GPU. You would comment on your experience and how hard is it to optimize things on GPU versus using this HLS?
attribute that to fast compile times, lots of documentation, and lots of example programs. Open source. Thank you very much. Oh, one more?
I think we're
Out of time?
Thank
Thank you.